Perfect half square triangles and quarter square triangles are an essential part of so many of the quilts that we make today, such as this star. I'm going to show you a super easy way to make both types of blocks quickly and accurately. We're going to use a ruler called Perfect Half and Quarter Square Triangles. The ruler has 3 sections to it. The first section is actually used to mark your quilt squares so that you know where to sew. Then we move to the other side of the ruler after we've sewn, and that helps us cut our quilt squares in half. And lastly, we move to the center of the ruler so we can square up our quilt blocks. This ruler will allow you to square up anything as large as 6.5 inches. To start out with, we always want to cut our squares and put them right sides together. When we make half square triangles, whatever our finished size is, we always want to have it end in a 7/8. So for example, if I want a finished size of 5.5, I'm going to cut my quilt squares to 5 7/8. And that's what I've done with this block here. I've cut 2 squares at 5 7/8. When we get done marking, sewing, and squaring up, we'll have a finished 5.5 inch block to sew into our quilt. So after I've layered my quilt squares right sides together, what I want to do is actually mark my sewing lines. So we're going to start on one side of the ruler, and what we're going to do is take the diagonal line that you see on the ruler, and we're going to run it right through the center of that quilt block, corner to corner, and that will show me exactly where I can mark my sewing lines. So on either side of that center, I'm actually going to mark 2 lines, and those will be for sewing. I'm going to take this away and show that to you. So these are now my sewing lines. So let's take that to our sewing machine and sew together our square. Here's one where I already have that process completed. My block is now sewn together. Now I need to cut it in half, so I'll actually have my 2 half square triangles. I'm going to move to the other side of the ruler, and I'm going to line the dotted lines on the ruler up with the lines that I've just sewn. And I'm also going to make sure at the same time that I line those up that I'm going to be cutting right through the center of my square, corner to corner. So once I have everything lined up, take your rotary cutter and cut right through the center. And that's going to yield you 2 half square triangles. And here's one that's finished and pressed. The last step in our process is we now need to square it up. Now we're going to go to the center of our ruler, and what I'm going to do is line up my ruler so that it falls between the 5.5 inch marks. I'm also going to line up that diagonal 45-degree line with my seam line through the middle of the triangle. Once I have those 3 things lined up, I am going to go ahead and begin to square. So I will cut at 5.5 on one side and 5.5 on the other side, and take away. Then turn my square in the other direction and square up the other 2 sides. Again, I'm lining up the diagonal 45-degree mark with my stitching line and making sure that I'm at 5.5 on either side of center. And then I'll go ahead and square up. And this yields my perfect 5.5 inch half square triangle. If I were to take 2 half square triangles like this, layer them together, and repeat the process of marking my lines down the center, stitching, cutting in half, pressing, what I would end up with are my perfect quarter square triangles as you see here. So this is a versatile ruler. You can quickly mark, sew, cut, and square for perfect half and quarter square triangle blocks.